This was meant to happen earlier in the week, but it's a pleasure to welcome back to the programme the former BBC journalist, the author, and the man behind not the BCFM politics show in Bristol, our friend, the great Tony Gosling, Esquire.
Oh, come on.
Good
come on
evening.
With the great. I
How
can't
are
even
you?
get through to you on Monday.
I know, we thought for a minute. There's a good reason as well why you tweeted that it might have been a bit of interference. And the reason is, genuinely, you've had to put up with some of that crap over the years where broadcasts mysteriously go down. And I know that interference is genuine. Sadly, this time, or happily this time, it was a firmware thing here in the studio. It was my bloody fault, not yours or anybody else's. Welcome back. Before you talk to me a little bit later this hour about Benjamin Netanyahu and Syria, which I know you're only dying to get into, because I've just spent the last half an hour talking about Syria, can I ask you to give me your take on the nationwide protests by farmers in this country, which we've seen around the country, but which today moved to Westminster, tractors pulling up there to protest Labour's plans for inheritance tax for farmers, applying from April 2026, meaning that if your farm and your assets are worth more than $1 million, you will pay inheritance tax. Farmers are pissed off. They say it's next to impossible to make a living on farms in any case, and this is going to put us out of business. What are your thoughts on that? Because the conservative media seems to be overwhelmingly weighing in behind the farmers, and that's when I'm at my most suspicious. What do you think about it?
Well, I mean, I did warn about this sort of thing. I mean, I don't know if you remember, I was over in New Zealand while they were doing a similar sort of thing over there, really attacking farmers. That was back in 2020. And I was thinking, well, thank goodness we've got a Tory government. I don't often say that, but from the farmers' point of view, they weren't really, I mean, farmers aren't Tories. They vote Tories because they know the Conservative Party looks after farming and the countryside much better than Labour, which is an urban party. And so I think what we've seen over the last couple of months, first of all, is this introduction of this inheritance tax, which, by the way, is not paid by Blackrock. It's not paid by the National Trust. It's not paid by corporate. And in fact, it's not paid by a large number of the big landowners, like the Duke of Westminster, Duke of Buccleuch, institutional historic landowners who got their land back in the Norman Conquest by just fighting for it and grabbing it at the time, and have kept it ever since as a massive, massive resource, which they simply do not share. In fact, much of that land they've never even walked on. And so the farmers are under attack, quite definitely. And you know what, it's funny, but I'm just walking back to the car right now, just ambling back after a bit of a Rupert the Bear reconnaissance mission in Wiltshire to what is replacing family farms funded by private equity, hedge funds, because they've worked out that they can make more money than family farmers can from the land. So what they've been doing here in Wiltshire is building a massive, well, to start with, it was I think about 6-7 acre solar farm. It's now a bit more than doubled in size, and that solar farm is feeding into a business which is a massive, massive greenhouse, all automated inside. And in that greenhouse, well, we did smell a bit of cannabis.
We smelled a bit of ganj.
I'm not saying they're growing cannabis in there, no. It's probably just one of the workers having a smoke. But it's all automated, and of course the energy from the solar farm, the electricity is going in to drive this thing. Now, I don't know how many acres of greenhouses they've got in there, but it's all complete new build. Obviously, someone has bought the land off of a farmer, and they're now. And so the policy is a World Economic Forum policy. What they're doing is they're financing people to buy farmland. And this is the reason farmland's so high, because you can make a lot of money doing a World Economic Forum project on land. And because they're making a lot more money from this intense agriculture in this artificial greenhouse situation, automated, etc., with no labour costs, the government is looking at that and saying, well, we're going to be able to tax that a lot more. They're making a lot more money from that square acre or 10 acres or 20 acres than the old farmers were. And so they see this as just simple economic growth, and they're behind it, Richie. Now, the farmers are being elbowed out of the countryside right now by this specific tax, which they could easily have a different tax. I was just listening to the select committee this morning on LBC, talking about having a different type of tax, which already exists, which just stops people investing in farmland just to save paying inheritance tax. So they could have done that, but no, they want the families off the farm in the same way as in the 1990s and noughties we saw, and 80s actually, through Thatcherism, we saw family businesses booted out, family butchers, greengrocers, etc., booted out of the high street, and the chains moving in, the multinational companies moving in, your Lidls and your supermarkets.
Haven't we seen this in America?
Farmers,
we've seen this in America. Go ahead.
If you talk to farmers, you will find, as a man and to a woman, they hate the supermarkets because they're price takers. They have no negotiating clout with these supermarkets and with the big food distributors. So if they come along and they'll say, right, we're going to have those 5,000 eggs or 5 million eggs or whatever it is they take, and we're going to pay you this for them. And the farmers, well, I think you should know. Well, okay, fine. And they turn their back and walk away. So they're price takers. They've got no clout. And the government we elect has got to stand up for people like this, just as it should be standing up for the ordinary working people. Anybody that's not a bread-headed World Economic Forum businessman, it should be standing up for them, but it's not. It's bashing them over the head, getting them out of the way, so the World Economic Forum, big business, can move in. And it's the biggest thing. I mean, Enclosure, back in the 18th century in Britain, just wiped out villages and sent loads of people in work in factories. And it was an enormous, great social change. And this is the reason the farmers are out and the reason they're going to fight this. And thank God they are. They're very organised. They're very switched on to the sort of things I've just been telling you. And they're going to fight them all the way, right the way through to blocking food supplies and that sort of thing. It seems pretty obvious to me, because if they don't, the family farm is finished and BlackRock will be completely controlling the food chain from top to bottom.
Hedge funds, right? Take me through this again, step by step. Imagine I'm a bit of, I'm a Forrest Gump type today, right? So take me through this step by step. So they want traditional farmers off their farms to be replaced by hedge funds who own the land. They want to do some sort of intensive farming, a different type of farming, which doesn't necessarily require.
It's called industrial agriculture,
farming,
and to be fair, it's not BlackRock that will own the land.
Right.
BlackRock is owning the companies that own the land. So the company that's here, that I've just had a look at, has got a one-page, very snazzy animated website, but it's only one page. You click on see more and you just get the same page again. And those are the businesses. It's almost like a front organisation. Sorry, there is a helicopter heading in my direction as I saunter across this field. We're just near the Ministry of Defence here.
Right, that's the right place to do an interview with the Richie Allen show.
Anyway.
But hang on a second. So if the hedge funds then who hoover up all of this land and they begin to farm or they lease out the land for these other people to come in and farm, what does that mean for the ordinary person doing their weekly shopping? So what will it mean for the rest of us if the farmers are gone and farming is done this way?
Well, for a start, the farmers are absolutely right. It means much more reliance on imported food. But more importantly, it means these people will price fix, just as the supermarkets have been doing to the farmers. They will, and they already are. I don't know if you've seen, I was looking at the price of a carton, or whatever it is, a plastic tin of drinking chocolate's gone up from £2 to £4.50.
Yeah. Because
the supermarkets are able to just fix whatever price they want. And we'll be getting exactly the same with the whole food chain. So the government has got to step in. Otherwise, what we're going to have is a massive threat to food security from imported food. But most importantly, people just simply will not afford to be able to feed their kids. Or themselves.
I have a big but here. You're not going to like it, but it's true.
Fine.
Now, this is why I said at the beginning of this program, which you didn't hear because you were off on reconnaissance around the Ministry of Defence land there, which is brilliant. So here's the thing, right? I'm a journalist. You're a journalist. I've spent years and years in the mainstream media covering the European Union. I know that British farmers, through the Common Agricultural Policy, were quite happy for the influx of cheaper food coming in from the European Union into this country. So long as farmers in this country were subsidised, as they were, and often paid not to farm their land. Now, the right-wing media seems to be ignoring this. Now, I'm not saying, tough shit, Paddy, this is what you're left with. But farmers are no angels, Tony. Not in this country. They've not been angels, and they certainly were not angels in my country either. They should have seen this coming, because it's been happening a long time, and for many years they benefited from it. Over to you.
Well,
that's true,
yes,
right?
They have. I don't think farming's ever been massively profitable. And also there have been good decades and bad decades over the years. I think, so for around about the time of the First World War, the government decided, I think even just before that, the government decided to try and make sure that farmers were going to get decent prices, because they needed it to be they wanted the food supply to be reliable, quite sensibly. But it's gone up and down since then. And most recently, you'll find, farmers telling you all sorts of tales about, this is literally over the last 5 or 10 years. And obviously more since Brexit, since the subsidies have been being withdrawn. So, this is a deliberate act by the government. They said they were going to continue to pay the subsidies, but they just didn't. Simple as that. And so they are up against it. Think about the basic costs. If you've got chickens, for example, you have enormous feed costs, which can go up and down. You have enormous electricity costs, which can go up and down. One of the farmers I interviewed at the protest in London a few weeks ago, he said his electricity bills quadrupled over the last 4 or 5 years since we had that hike in 2021, which was by the fuel companies, when they put the fuel up about 25 pence a gallon or a litre for no apparent reason other than they can, And there was, they came up with an excuse, didn't they? Do you remember we can't find enough tanker drivers, therefore we can't. They were starving the supply as an excuse to put the price up. So this is what fascists do. They price fix the whole time because the government is so weak and disinterested in the population that they're going to allow them to make a big strategic decision like that. So farmers have suffered massively with the increase in energy prices too, and of course the land price. So the temptation is to just sell up, isn't it? That's the temptation.
That's the temptation.
If you're a marginal farm, land prices are high. Blackrock are just sitting there waiting, itching to buy your land, or whoever it is that's a front operation for Blackrock, like the people behind me. And so the temptation is just, let's go, let's forget it, because it's too marginal. So they aren't super rich anymore. I don't think, maybe in the 1980s, 70s, and when the government was a strong government that was working for the population, like the Wilson government and the Second World War, etc., the farmers were fairly understood to be, we've got to look after them, otherwise the rest of society will fall apart. There's none of that now, Richie. None of it at all.
No,
Nothing.
And look, I'm not in favour of what is happening. Of course I'm not. I'm in favour of people in this country eating food produced by British farmers, where the standards, where it's much easier for a British consumer to determine if the standards are up to scratch if you're buying locally or buying from farmers growing in this country. But the point I'm making is, and I'm not going to labour it too much more because I want to talk as well about Syria and what's been going on there.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making is, and it's a fair point, the farmers were like fat cats for years in the European Union, and I don't think farmers were overly concerned at that time about what farming meant for the ordinary British punter. Now that's number one. And number two, how many of these farmers who are in Westminster today or elsewhere, how many of them have agreed to feed their cattle with that feed that's got that additive in it now, that bovine additive, right? Which might be incredibly detrimental to human health. So, these are legitimate questions, but the conservative media don't ask these questions,
Listen, the Arla question, let's just deal with that because it's been in the news all this week.
It's very important, yeah.
And it's great to see the farmers celebrating because the consumers are putting pressure on their end. The thing is, they're in a situation a bit like the criminal banks. So when you get a bank that's happy to do money laundering with suitcases full of cash, that bank does better than the bank down the road that says no to the drug dealers, right? So the same is happening in farming. So the farmers that go, okay, we'll go along with this Arla thing, they're making a bit more money. And so the temptation is just to, especially when you're marginal, your profits are marginal, I mean, just think about the amount of profit that's being made behind me from the solar farm, right? Just as simple as this. This is what's going on now with the solar farms, is that they are actually getting paid something like 4 or 5 times the amount that it costs them to generate that solar energy there. So no wonder that place has just expanded from the way it was a couple of years ago. It's now like something like 2 or 3 times bigger than it was, because they're paying. It's a rigged market. They're paying. The consumers are paying the same price for that solar as they are for nuclear power. That's the way that the energy markets, the electricity market, is fixed. So of course they're going, well, we're making an absolute fortune of this. This is what the government's looking at. It's scams like that, and the government are looking at this and saying, well, look, there's no comparison. These silly little family farmers, they're just not making enough money. We can't tax them. Some of them are actually making a loss some years, so we're not taxing them. So let's just turn the whole land of the country as much as we can over to these people, and we can rake in loads and loads of business rates and corporations.
And is there a bigger picture?
It's a simple matter of pounds, shillings, and pence. That's what it's about.
So you think it's simply about money, but there are listeners, many of them.
Growth. They're obsessed with growth.
Well,
the city of London has growth as a religion. It's a religion. They must have growth. Now, if you think about it, the water companies, as they double the price of water for us, that's growth. So what they're doing is their religion is screwing the population right now.
So that's one aspect of it. So the greed and the money, 59% Thames Water, I hear you. We want 59% increase on the bills, I get it.
So support the farmers is all I'd say. I mean, the family farmers, and they die. That's what they're being penalised for.
Can I get a word in on my own programme? I agree with you.
Don't die. The corporate landowners, BlackRock doesn't die. It's not getting taxed. No inheritance tax for BlackRock. So they're being penalised for dying, which is just an appalling idea. Everything, the wealth and the land is being transferred from individuals to corporations. If
and what about, hang on,
film The Corporation, that explains the corporation is, in legal terms, a living thing.
The corporation...
It never pays any inheritance tax.
Now, you take a breath for a minute before you choke to death there. The corporation, the book is better. The book was written by a guy called Joel McCann. It's a great book. It's a great read. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, what about those who are listening to this who say, yes, of course it's about money on one level. On another level, it's about control the food, control the population. This is all about Agenda 2030. This is all about the Great Reset. A lot of our listeners saying that. What do you think?
Yeah, partly. I mean, that's another side of it. But I just think this is to understand ownership of land. Land is, whatever way you look at it, it's the source of all wealth. So money is just what you have to use if you don't have any land. And so that's why this is such a pernicious form of enclosure. That's privatization of land, taking it away from individuals and giving it to these massive corporations. It's just like what happened, like I said, in the 18th century. And I mean, it is a massive social change that is being brought in here. And I think it's mainly down to the city of the city of London. And it's part of a global problem. Okay, so we've got, particularly in the West, we've got governments which are preying on their own people for corporate benefit. We've also got, of course, over in the Middle East and in Ukraine, arms companies that are killing innocent people, particularly in Gaza, etc., for geostrategic purposes. So both over there and at home, we have a kind of psychopathic creditor class who are trying to spin everything they do as, oh, we're just doing it for the environment. Oh, it's just for human rights. human rights lawyer Keir Starmer backing the genocide in Gaza. And so they're hoping to use the mass media just to bamboozle everybody. This is the amazing invention of television. First it was the printing press, then television, radio, that sort of thing. The control of that, the ownership of that by finance capitalism, again, by the BlackRock types, the big, powerful hedge funds and private equity firms, they just buy up the competition. They've also bought up the political parties in the West, in the finance capitalism world. So I think that's what we're dealing with, an enemy at home, and also that there are other people in other parts of the world that are watching this going, Christ, what the hell's happening over there? These are a bunch of total maniacs. I would call them, Richie, as you know, having seen my book, a Fourth Reich. They have basically inherited. They have inherited what is effectively a kind of financial Fourth Reich. This is an ownership system a very aggressive financial economic warfare system, which is going in and taking out anything, whether it's trade unions, whether it's the church or whatever, that stands in the way ideologically or anything else. And I
believe all roads lead to a technocratic dystopian future where, if they have their way, the population of the planet will be severely reduced. That's what I believe. And I don't, don't arrive at that belief lightly. It's something I resisted heavily for years. For me, it's a one world government depopulation agenda. Tony Gosling is our guest. Tony, it's very windy there. Hang on a sec. It's 28 minutes to the top of the hour. Your messages, your comments, please. Thank you for them. Tony, Kevin in Tyrone says, as regards to farmers and their subsidies, Richie, you're right, it was greed. Not that I'm in favour of what's happening to them now, but they were greedy. It's just like the Celtic Tiger in Ireland. If it sounds too good to be true and all that jazz, it is, says Kev in Tyrone. Carlos has been on to say, the butchers, the bakers and the candlestick makers are now charity shops. Non-indigenous barbers and nail bars. Forgive me, I'll hand myself in on the way back from Lidl or Lidl. Yes, our high streets have been completely transformed. You're right. Where would farmers sell now? They don't have butchers and greengrocers on the high street anymore. They've got no choice to sell to the great supermarket conglomerates. And as you said, Tony, because of that, those supermarket conglomerates can say, this is our price, take it or leave it. And the farmers have no choice but to take it. Yeah. It's tragic, but it's true. Tony wrote a number of great books. One of them is The Traders of Arnhem. I recommend you check it out. Tony, I want to talk about Syria. We should all rejoice now, apparently, because moderate rebels have taken over Damascus, and this bodes well for peace and stability in Syria and in the region. All sorts of stuff that we could talk about. The Israelis have been bombing naval bases. They've been bombing military installations. The Israeli PM, Benjamin Netanyahu, says, well, we have to do that because we don't want the new rulers of Syria turning their ire on Israel. What a 2 weeks it's been, Tony. What are your thoughts? Head spinning.
Well,
here.
Look, it's very interesting to see the Israelis bombing and destroying all this kit. Wouldn't it be a bit more sensible, say, for example, with the naval ships to have their special forces go and take this over and put an Israeli flag on the side of it?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it? I mean, this is worth a lot of money. This stuff we're talking about, billions go into these battleships and warships. Well, I don't have battleships anymore, frigates, etc. And so I was scratching my head about that earlier. And of course, the answer is pretty simple, isn't it? That the arms industry likes to sell this stuff. And so it's great. If it all gets scrapped, then someone else is going to have to replace it and buy a new one. So the arms business in the West, which is totally, I don't know if did you hear the Dominic Cummings interview last week? He was talking about this. Very interesting talk he did.
Yeah.
Talking about how broken the Ministry of Defence and the British and the American arms business is. That basically the Ministry of Defence has got this kind of revolving door with BAE Systems, who build much of the kit, and other arms companies. So they do orders whilst they're at the MOD, and then they leave the MOD and they join the arms company, and they get a massive payoff, and they become a director, they get share dividends and God knows what. So It's completely corrupt. So this is I think why the Israeli you would have thought they would just go and grab those warships, wouldn't you? I would have thought so.
Well, yeah, but also boots on the ground. I mean, to take those arms, I mean, if you leave the naval yard to one side and you talk about weapons dumps, Israel, much as Israel might like to put boots on the ground deep into Syria to take that stuff, that's not going to look good, and they're not going to be allowed. No, they're not going to do that, are they? So they're not going to put boots on the ground to try and recover all of that hardware. But I hear you, destroy it, and then the new regime in Syria has got to go and spend all that money. What you said, by the way, about the revolving door thing, I mean, it's astonishing that we even talk about that, and we know that nobody is ever going to be arrested. You're absolutely right. Wasn't it even more interesting?
What Cummings said was that in the previous generations, and even in Victorian times, they were sent to jail. Now everyone just shrugs their shoulders and says, "Oh, well, that's just the way it works." And of course, the kit that the armed forces get is rubbish, like some of these ships that have just been mothballed almost as soon as they've been built. The F-35 scamjet, which can't turn a corner very fast because the wings start to snap, These things aren't just not, they're rubbish, and they're relying on psychological warfare, cyber warfare, much, much more than they are on actual kit, I think. But the general thing with Syria, look, take a step back from it. My own view of this is look at Trump. I mean, he made a big deal about stopping the war in Ukraine. Has he just cut a deal with Putin? Is that what's happened here?
Do you think so?
Putin apparently was saying that it was they'd kind of had enough of the operations the Russians have been doing since 2014 down in Syria. They're kind of half in and half out. They've got a few air bases. They've got the naval bases. But they don't really have much in the way of boots on the ground at all, the Russians. So yeah, they're kind of half in and half out. So I think that's what's happened. I think Trump and Putin have just done a deal. Like, okay, you can stop if you pull out of Syria, we will just stop the war in Ukraine. And Putin's been happy with that. And Assad has just been kind of sacrificed, really, because, I mean, on his own, he wasn't a very powerful chap. He was sort of, it was only the Russians in 2014 that saved his bacon. I mean, they were at the gates of Damascus, and the Russians came in and started bombing the headquarters and the strategic weapons dumps for these Western NATO-backed, Israeli-backed, British-backed, MI6-backed rebels. And which, by the way, Dilyana Gatasheva, people often forget her. She's a Bulgarian journalist that did a fantastic job on tracing the arms getting to ISIS from the United States, all the way through Bulgaria, through a couple of like dodgy Azerbaijani airlines or something. And they were doing these regular weekly shipments to ISIS by air of arms from the United States. But anyway, so that I think is it in a nutshell. I think that's probably what's happened here is that a much bigger geopolitical deal has been done. Let's just see if Trump keeps his word and stops the war in Ukraine. I think everyone would be very, very happy to see that. Absolutely.
If you're right and a deal has been struck, who's likely to have gotten the better end of that deal? Who does it suit more? That's the question, isn't it?
Oh, look, I would suggest also that the Russians may be back in the Middle East at some point. From a military point of view, you've got to look at what they were doing. Now, did they want to put more troops in to have more clout in Syria or not? The answer was, look, we're already committed in Ukraine. Our main job is the defense of Russia, not the defense of Syria or Libya or any of these other countries which they didn't help to defend. So it might just be that simple, and that doesn't preclude the Russians going in on a big, big scale in the future somewhere down there. I mean, they're obviously thinking about Georgia, which is on the main road really from Moscow to Damascus, the way that they're having to battle away really over control of Georgia with the Western Colour Revolution trying to do a Ukraine in Georgia too, which is right on the Russian border there. So I guess that's, yeah, but the thing is, this is about the Greater Israel, isn't it? What's happening in Syria? The Israelis moving out. That's what they're doing. It's the Greater Israel. It's exactly what Netanyahu and his far right bloc coalition that are now the fascists, the Fourth Reichists, the Nazis running Israel. That's actually what I think anyway. That's exactly what they're doing. Is they're just rolling on with the Brits and the Americans and NATO, the Greater Israel project, and loads of thousands and thousands, probably millions of acres of land. It's an epic struggle, Richie, I think, between good and evil. It's like sort of, I don't know, like World War II, the Lord of the Rings or something. The goodies and the baddies are very, very clear, it seems to me. The Israelis are the genocidalists who want to bully the entire world into submission, starting with the Middle East. And they're getting the biggest collaborators here in London and Washington.
What about, I asked my first guest this question. So the former Reagan's Assistant Secretary of the Treasury is Paul Craig Roberts, as you well know. His belief is, Chomsky agrees with him, many other intellectuals, intellectuals in inverted commas, air quotes, right? But they say, in reality, it's the neocon dog wagging the Israeli tail, not the other way around. And it was always thus, and that people like us get wrapped up in we get too wrapped up in Israel's hegemony and Israel's control of Western democracy, because this is their thought,
it's
right?
The Masons, the Freemasons. I think it's a elite in London, Washington, and Tel Aviv. Look, think about it. Who created Washington? Who created the United States of America? It was the Brits. Who created Israel? It was the Brits. This is a British project. And I don't know if you know the LaRouche people, but I love having them on from time to time on my program, because their first line is always, actually, everyone thinks it's the Americans. No, it's not. It's the British. And not that far from me down the road here is Bowood House, just near Chippenham, which is where there was a decision made in the late 1700s, early 1800s to stop any kind of attempt from Britain to get back control of America after the War of Independence, and to use secret society infiltration to control the Americans instead. And that was in a book, I think it's called Who We Are, the book, by Anton Chaikin, whose father, Jacob Chaikin, and he's part of the LaRouche organization. I don't know if he's even still alive. I haven't spoken to him for a couple of years, but Anton's book explains that's what happened, is that they decided to use Freemasonry to infiltrate and control US politics and US political parties in order to control America. So I think a lot of it is, if you think about it, for example, this Al-Sham organization that used to be Al-Nusra, but it just changed its name. In the American State Department website, it's very clear they're proscribed. In other words, if you support them, if I say I love not love them, I won't say that now, of course. But if I was to say that, then I could be potentially arrested under the Terrorism Act for supporting a proscribed organisation in America. Now, in Britain, it's not clear, right? So you go onto the Foreign Office website. There's a great long list of proscribed organisations, about 25 of them, but this group is not on there. And what they say is, well, we consider it to be just a sort of Al-Qaeda affiliate. So it sort of is on there, but it's not. Now, this tells me that the British are keeping this, and MI6 are keeping this deliberately vague, right? So what happens if one of their mates, who's been massively successful over in toppling Assad in Syria, wants to come back to Britain? Well, no questions asked. No, you're not on the list, mate. It's okay. You can come in through, have a nice British passport, and everything will be fine. So that's, to me, is a bit of a clue about who's really behind. I think MI6 have been the lead people, and they were, in fact, if you go right the way back to the 1980s at Operation Cyclone, along with the CIA, MI6 were starting this whole thing of armed jihadi groups to overthrow the Russians in Afghanistan, and they've been at it ever since. I mean, we've got the Abrahamic faiths, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, all being hijacked, basically. That's it. I mean, you've got the Zionists in Israel, the maniacal Greater Israel people. They're talking about they believe in God and everything, but God isn't doing anything, so we're going to have to do it for him. Characters, and the same with the radical, you call them, actually maniacal Muslims. I mean, I live near Muslims are nothing like this. So, they're not maniacs at all. And of course, you've got the mad Christian Zionists like Huckabee, who's just about to become the US ambassador to Israel. So that's, I think, what they're up to. And they have been ever since the 1980s with Operation Cyclone. And the Brits seem to be the lead agent. MI6 seem to be the lead agency. In fact, wasn't it Dearlove, the ex-MI6 boss, was on the radio, the telly the other day saying, well, this really is actually the beginning of World War III now. So thank you very much, MI6.
Very good. Can I jump in? Let me jump in. This is important. This is important. Let me jump in. It's not important because I say so, but it's important because many of my listeners feel like this. Imagine, I know you don't agree with this, the one and only time you interviewed me on your show, I knew you'd never have me back because I believe this stuff.
That was good. That was when the Queen died, wasn't it?
I think so. It was just after Queen Elizabeth II died, yeah. To be fair, you gave me a good say. So, could it be possible then? Just accept that it's possible. While everything you have said I can't dispute, right? I can't, because it's happening in front of my eyes. But imagine if it's all part of one great psyop on the 7 billion people living on this planet to pave the way for genuine global governance. For that one. Imagine you make life so unbearable on planet Earth, Tony. Problem, reaction, solution. That eventually, if you do have some sort of a third world war, right, that eventually people will accept that there's got to be central command on planet Earth. Why not? Why not?
Well, that's the idea. Certainly. Yeah. No, I agree. That's certainly that's what they're planning. They're planning to bring that out of it. I mean, I wouldn't call it problem, reaction, solution. I think people have got to understand what is accelerationism. This is actually the philosophy which is adhered to by the elite, people like Peter Thiel, people like this are very interested in it. They love it. The idea, of course, is what's going on in the countryside with the farmers. This is a form of accelerationism. What they're doing is they're precipitating social collapse. Kees van der Pale's book was brilliant. I read that maybe 2 years ago now. I think it's called States of Emergency, where he talks about the elite knowing that what they're doing is creating these horrific crises where people won't be able to eat, they won't be able to get a job.
Yes.
There'll be all sorts of riots on the streets and this sort of thing. And what he explains is that they're planning for all this. They know this is all going to happen, but they need to make sure that the people are boxed in. And that they've brought in new laws, haven't they, in Britain, to say that government agencies can now just break the law, including murdering people with impunity.
That's right.
I mean, this is unthinkable, really.
And do you know their greatest weapon, Tony?
So they're ready for it. They're creating a crisis. They're creating chaos. And I would even recommend, I haven't read these books since I was about 17, 18, Michael Moorcock and his Elric series, where he talks about the sort of battle or war going on between law and chaos. I would just call it order and chaos. And of course, I think Moorcock was getting some of his ideas from the Scottish Rite Freemasonries, these satanic masons whose motto is order from chaos. So the idea is you create as much chaos as you can and you come in as the savior, like Hitler did in the 1920s in Germany, and say, it's okay, I'll sort everything out. And everyone goes, thank you. So I think that's the sort of manipulation that you're talking about. But I don't think the Russians are quite in there. The Chinese definitely are. China was set up by the Yale back in the 1920s. Mao was funded by the Satanists at the Skull and Bones Yale University. At least that's the Yale connection, I think. That's why Mao was getting his money. It was them from Yale University. So they set up this kind of system over there, which was finally instituted after World War II with communist China. But that's all run by secret societies. I think just like America is by the Masons. You look at President Xi. Right. There's a brilliant video of one of his aides is running over towards him and is just about to give him a piece of paper, and some security guard basically like rugby tackles him out of the way. Xi doesn't even bat an eyelid. It's like he's not human. Oh right, you're my assistant, and they've just grabbed you as if you're some sort of criminal. And so I don't mind. And he turns around, you can see him stop and look. Is that right?
It's pretty bizarre.
He just walks on. He's like Biden. These kind of zombies, that's what we're dealing with China. It's a completely and utterly controlled
I'm going to give you the
society.
final word, but we've really only got 3 minutes because of a comment. So I'm going to give you the final word, but let me say two things on this. The only reason I disagree with you vis-a-vis Russia is, and you can use your time to come back at me on this if you want, but I'm going to say it, is because in my learned opinion, everything that Vladimir Putin has done suits the accelerationism agenda. Now, before you jump back in, so I believe he's captured. Everybody else disagrees with me. I agree with everything you said. And for me, the greatest barrier to humanity understanding it has been their greatest weapon, which is identity politics. Would you believe, and you probably get this too, at least 3 to 4 times a week, I receive long-winded emails from people, some of them very nice, saying, you're a coward, Richie. You just won't say it's the Jews because you're scared of the Jews. I don't believe it's the Jews.
Yeah, well,
I don't believe it's the Muslims.
Jews, so
of course, right?
That's
yeah, but again, I genuinely mean it when I say that all of these agendas are what you described as perma-crises, to advance the accelerationism agenda, to take us to this dystopian way of living they want us. And all of these things, even though for many people they are very real and very horrible, the 50 or 60,000 Palestinians that have been slaughtered, the millions of Yemenis that have been slaughtered, the millions in Ukraine, the young Russian men, the young Ukrainian men, it's very real for them. But it all feeds into this overarching agenda, I believe. Now, look at your watch, because we are running out of time. I'm going to say it before you come back. Hang on. Just one second. Before Tony gets the absolute final word. Not the BCFM Politics Show every Friday at 5, thisweek.org.uk, bilderberg.org. Tony's published some brilliant books. One is The Traders of Arnhem. Buy the books. Much of what we discuss when Tony comes on, covered in these books. Read them, buy them, support him. final word on what I said. You've only got 2 minutes. I will cut you off. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Well, there's also Bible studies on that account on eBay, which are quite nice for Christmas, and they're pictorial ones, so it takes you the whole history of the Bible, which is quite nice. But look, on your point, say a couple of things about Russia, particularly the Orthodox Church is important. I think they're the original church. The Catholics have always been, well, not the Catholics, but the Vatican has always been extremely dodgy, particularly through their secret society of the Jesuits. The patriarchs of the Orthodox Church are still in a way at war with Catholicism and the Protestant Church. So that's Moscow is really now the main hub for Orthodox Christianity, which was set up by the original Christians. So it's not as tainted as these other versions. But think about the Skripal case as well. Craig Murray pointed out last week. I mean, this is one of the main reasons they try and bash the Russians over the head. They came to Salisbury, which was my old BBC haunt back in 1992, 93, reporting there, to poison the Skripals. Well, Craig has pointed out that in the inquiry, in a section of it which has been ruled out by the judge as just hearsay, the guy who treated them in hospital is just hearsay. The Skripals. Yeah. He says that Yulia Skripal, communicating with the doctor, explained that they weren't poisoned by the Novichok on a door handle. They were rendered unconscious in Zizzy's restaurant when they were sitting down with the guy that's not supposed to exist because of a D notice, Pablo Miller from MI6.
Yeah.
And so it's almost certain that Miller sprayed something at them which rendered them unconscious, didn't kill them. And he probably got that from Porton Down, just 5 minutes drive down the road, which is the Chemical Biological Weapons Research Centre for the UK. And so, no, I think that the Russians are like a third force. You've got the main World War III protagonists have been set up to be the United States and controlled by the Brits probably, and China, and these two secret society controlled massive bureaucracies, and the Russians are sitting on the sidelines up in the north thinking, good God, what's going on here? I honestly think they're like Winston Churchill. This is their finest hour. They're getting ready for it and looking at trying to save humanity. You look at some of the discussions that are had at Valdai and some of these big forums that they have in St. Petersburg and Moscow and elsewhere in Russia. They are the mature people in the room. They are effectively a kind of form of United Nations that are outside the main fight. And it's probably very prudent of them to move out of the Middle East. And they may well be back in the future, Richie. That's what I see. And they are absolutely, desperate to end this war in Ukraine. Of course they are. Anyone would be. If we had an occupied force in Scotland fighting away, its way down into England, everyone would want to be rid of that straight away. So anyway, thanks. Nice to chat to you again.
Always.
I hope that's helpful and useful for you.
Thank you. And I am a man of my word. I will not come back and say anything else about that or Russia. You've had the last word. Tony, we'll talk again soon. Maybe not this side of Christmas, certainly in January. Merry Christmas to you and to all who sail in the Not the BCFM Politics Show. It's a vital, vital programme and source of information.
Well, it is, and I really hope these helicopters are not just taking bundles of cannabis backwards and forwards to the military base from that giant greenhouse, but they haven't stopped for the hour or so I've been chatting with you.
Come and live here for a bit up around Media City.